Hello! Welcome to, unfortunately, another video that nobody wants to hear. It's a Blazers video again, because of fucking course it is. I kind of mentioned it, and I definitely mentioned it in my last video, expressing and talking about how the Blazers are non-committal. They never commit to fucking anything, dude. Never do they ever. And it's a pain in the ass, let me tell you. I mean, technically Dame's the same way. When I said in my last video that they literally are the definition of a toxic relationship, and thus they are perfect for each other because of the fact that they literally bring out the worst in each other in terms of their worst traits, their most toxic traits. They absolutely do that, and they proved it again last night during the 2023 NBA draft, because the Blazers continued to be non-committal to any particular direction whatsoever. They didn't commit to a rebuild. They didn't commit to trading Dame. And they didn't commit to rebuilding or retooling around Dame, going into the luxury tax, being willing to finally do that to make an actual proper swing at getting some actual proper stars around him and some really high quality veteran role players in order to be able to contend. They didn't do any of that. They are just so content to continue to be incompetent and stupid about it and decide, yeah, you know what, we're not picking any particular direction for this franchise. We're just going to keep doing what we've been doing the entire time and pretending we can literally do all three at the same time. When you literally, it's impossible. You can't. And so they are determined to believe they can, and so they're just coasting. They're just continuing to go down the same fucking direction they've been doing the entire time, which was the most predictable result in my personal opinion. They've kept all three picks. That puts the restriction of 30 days, it turns out it is, I thought it was way longer than that, on the team from being able to trade them. It doesn't mean they won't trade them here in the future, but I just find it unlikely, because Dame's toxic trait that's brought out and is just passing the fucking toxicity puck between, just really aggressively now. It's no longer passive aggressive. It's just like, no, you know, you know, you know, you know, you know, you know, you. And it's just like, they're just like aggressively telling each other, you have to commit. No, you have to commit. No, you need to choose. No, you need to choose. You need to choose. And it's just like, he's non-committal himself to actually making demands. He's non-committal himself to doing anything that would make sense that most stars in this position would have done probably a few seasons back, like at least by his 7th season with the team, which is force their hand. Give them a fucking ultimatum and say, look, you either fully commit and we're willing to spend what you deem is way too much money to build a contender around me, or get me the fuck off your team. I'm not willing to play here anymore, aka trade me. It's gonna be one or the other. You fucking decide. That's what he's been needing to do. He refuses to do it. He's still refusing to do it. Even with his whole publicity tour he's been doing all summer long, and all of his cryptic tweets, whatever, you know, it literally directly admitting he's not content here. He doesn't like the idea of playing with no more rookies, or 19-year-olds, as he puts it. He didn't want to do it, and he even publicly pointed out that he wants them to trade that 3rd pick, which of course they didn't. And so I just want to put this out there for Miami Heat fans. Don't think that you should lose hope yet at getting Dame, because though it is almost inevitable he won't demand a trade and he won't give him an ultimatum, there's a chance he does, and or the team does feel forced. And so as a result, that's when you can spring into action and get him, because obviously we have the entire first half of the NBA season to then trade some of our picks and assets to you with Dame, if that is unfortunately necessary. So as a result, that could still happen for you guys. There is still a pretty decent chance. And so if I was the Miami Heat front office, I would not be giving up on this quite yet. I would keep it on the back burner, because obviously now it's no longer relevant of a choice. You can't really, it's not a choice at all for you anymore. It's for anybody. So as a result, that's what the draft confirmed. So now what you got to do is you got to, I guess you could say, retool your mindset and reorient it to where, okay, so we're not going to be able to get him yet. So we'll put him in pursuing him on the back burner until, say, upwards through the trade deadline. So the first half of the season starts, and then we'll go back to trying to pursue it and being always right there, ready to jump any point in time. It feels like we have another chance to be able to make another offer to be able to get him. up until and through the trade deadline. But before then, you got to refocus, obviously. And so that's why they're looking at Mason Plumlee. And ironically, it's literally like, I think literally the list was like 80% former Blazers players, because of fucking course it was. And by the way, every single time, it doesn't matter if it's a role player or not, every single time there is a Blazers player that gets traded somewhere else, they always end up so sought after on championship contenders, because they always end up thriving elsewhere. It says a hell of a lot about this team in particular, doesn't it? How bad they are, and how clearly chemistry is never as good as it looks like on the surface and via public relations, PR, so what they're showing to us via social media and everything. And it also shows that players are not necessarily genuinely happy here. I don't like the trades that we would be able to do with Miami, though, because just like I am not a fan of Ant. That is Anthony Simons. I am not a fan of him at all. I've been advocating to trade him since, Jesus Christ, I think year 3 of his so I guess season before last. I've been advocating to trade him because I don't see him having anywhere remotely close to the potential that anybody else does. And it's ironic because last night, everybody was in the Blazers fan base and elsewhere were bitching about how it's like, oh, Ant is so underrated. And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? He is egregiously overrated, and I will fucking die on that hill. And like I've stated in my comment, it's not an opinion. That's a observable fucking fact. Of course, not everybody's gonna fucking see it the same way, and most people won't, because most people don't have the same views. That's why you get conflicting draft comparisons and conflicting, all the other typical analytical stuff about different players, because they get it wrong a lot of times. And then these people that were considered crazy, like myself, later confirmed to be correct, and they just like, okay, whatever. That's not something to be upset about, but I'm sure delusional Blazers fans are going to be livid about that, and so I'll guess this video, if it gets any views, will probably get like 17 dislikes, because the delusional Blazers fans are very bitter, contemptuous people. They are so petty. It is so stupid. It's a pain in the ass, and it's really fucking frustrating to be a fan of this team and watch this toxic back and forth of the relationship between Dame and the team constantly going back and forth. I have nothing against necessarily trying a Scoot Shea lineup, but again, you have to trade Dame and you have to trade Ant. Otherwise, it just doesn't make any sense. Technically, you could try to justify keeping Ant by if you argued, okay, well, how about being a 6th man? Then yes, okay, maybe. Although I don't think he's worth his contract, especially if he's just a 6th man. But yeah, okay, and especially if he's not one of your primary ball handlers, even off the bench. Do not make Ant a primary ball handler, especially in the clutch. He is so infuriating to watch when he's a ball handler and a playmaker. He is not a playmaking guard. Makes so many boneheaded decisions, especially in the clutch. It drives me so fucking ballistic. So yeah, you could make an argument about that, I guess. Technically, I'll give that one to you. He belongs, just like I think CJ is. He's not a starter. He deserves to be a 6th man, because their game is 100% 6th man shit. Like, because you're talking about, oh, their offense, their scoring ability. Exactly. That's why you put him as an offensive player off the bench. You're 6th man. Because at that point, they're at their best, because they are absolutely reaming and creaming the living life out of the opponents, because the fact that their defenders are also now the ones off the bench. They're not remotely as good offensively. They're not remotely as good defensively, which is why you would love, and it's perfect, to be able to have players like a CJ McCollum and or his mini-me, Anthony Simons, coming off the bench as your 6th man. You can still give them 30 minutes a game as long as they're off the bench, because that way they are going to torch the living hell out of every opponent and their second line defenders, because they are not cut up for people of their offensive talent levels. But all the more reason why they're perfect for 6-man roles is because they're terrible at defense. They're some of the league's worst defenders, as Anthony Simons and CJ McCollum. Thus why it makes even more intense sense to never start them ever and only have them be a 6th man, because they'll be a flamethrower off the bench. They'll be practically unstoppable. They could literally average 30 points a game if you let them off the bench as a 6th man, but still showcase how horrific of a defender they are, and thus how much more justifiable it is that they are off the bench. And that's huge for a team that may not have the most scoring heavy front line, being the starting line. Or maybe they're more balanced. So maybe you have 2 or 3 scorers. It's perfect to have that kind of a super offensive player off your 6-man rotation, because it helps bolster your offense that much more, and it ensures it will continue, if not heat up more, because of it. It also makes them an energizer. There's a lot of reasons why it's perfect for Ant to come off the bench or a CJ McCollum to come off benches and never actually start them, because they're detrimental starting them defensively. They're perfect off the bench, though, because of that, and because, again, their offense, because they're going to get only better. Their percentages are going to skyrocket if they're off the bench. Think about it, because there's, again, you're not your starting line defenders. They're second-tier defenders. They're second-line players. They're the ones that are coming off the bench. Your percentages are going to go up even further. That's the better point. That's the yet another reason why it's perfect to bring him off the bench. So yes, you can make an argument to keep Ant to put him off the bench. But again, do you really want to be paying him a $100 million contract? Just going over the general idea and logistics of it, that's how you could justify that. The problem, again, is I know I'm right when I say it's observable fact that he's overrated. Egregiously overrated. And again, across the board, I've said this in multiple videos, where he is so egregiously overrated by analysts, by media personnel, by fans, by current and former players, by general managers and owners of teams. Like, literally all the way top to bottom, he's that egregiously overrated. And you think, well, that's more reason to keep him. Wrong. It's more reason to trade him right now, because the fact he's literally at the peak of his value. Do you really want to take the high risk, low reward route of like, well, just in case we should keep him? Or do you want to actually go with the low risk, stupid high reward and trade him while you know he has this much value, where everybody raves about the guy? That's what you need to consider. If you're intelligent, not delusional, you're going to immediately side with me and be like, you're right, we should trade him right now, because he's at the peak of his value. We don't want to risk, doing it just in case he does somehow improve on the defensive end and does become even better. Like, right now, he's at his peak, because everybody's expecting him to improve in every category, supposedly. He's never going to improve defensively, I guarantee that. But still, you get the idea. And plus, again, the reason why I also bring this up is the obvious. If we do end up having to trade Dame, one, it gets rid of the logjam at shooting guard, point guard. Scoot now steps up to point guard. Ant is gone. Shea steps up. Now he's officially your starter, and you're truly 100% focused on building around him now and Scoot. You trade Nurk. God, I've said this multiple times in my last few videos. He's going to be a pain in the ass to find anybody willing to trade him for anything of value, because he's at the lowest value he ever has been in his career, and he's only getting older, which means he's probably going to keep decreasing. And well, we signed him for an $80 million contract over 4 years. It's like, oh God. So now it's going to be 3 years, $60 million. Is anyone really going to pay that? Probably not. But we have to trade him at that point. But that's exactly it, right? If we trade Dame, there's no point in keeping Ant. But then there's no point in keeping Nurk. So you might as well trade all of these starting, your star player starting lines. And God forbid if they, for some stupid reason, think it makes sense to re-sign Jeremiah Grant, when it didn't change shit for us. It didn't move the needle at all. For the love of God, you have to trade Jeremiah too. You have to. It's an inevitability. You cannot keep him as well. So it forces a full rebuild if Dame officially does finally demand a trade and they officially trade him this year. That's just how it has to go. So you have to then commit fully to a rebuild, especially considering you just drafted Scoot Henderson. You still have Shea. You're obviously building around him. You drafted Keegan Murray's brother. Chris? Was it Chris with a K? I can't remember. Anyway, you just drafted him. And, of course, you drafted another guy, Ryan Rupert? Yeah. Which they supposedly drafted each of these guys for their abilities and their fits currently. That technically means you have 3 extra new assets, young assets, to be able to throw into trades as well if you want to rebuild. So now you could keep and try to rebuild around Shaedon Sharpe and Scoot Henderson, and no longer maybe you do consider Keon Johnson, or I hate saying this, but Trendon Watford, because Trendon is so egregiously underrated, dude. Sorry for the background noise. But he's so egregiously underrated. And it's just like, I would hate to see him go. And knowing how underrated and underappreciated and undervalued he is as a player collectively across the league, from basketball fans, whether the casuals or not, Blazers fans, analysts, media personnel, current and former players, general managers, ownerships. Again, it's the exact opposite of Ant. Like, nobody values Trendon for some reason. And he is proving why he's such a great player, why he has incredible motor, he has incredible work ethic, and the dude is diehard committed to improving himself in his game on both ends of the court in every aspect. You know, like, he has so much egregious potential. And I love that, especially considering he's also an underdog, because he's an undrafted guy. It's so perfect to be able to keep him and rebuild around him as like a middle finger up to everybody who just never even considered his existence relevant on a roster. People, including Blazers fans, act like Trendon is just some random dude they signed off the fucking side of the road. Like the side of fucking Burnside and 5th or something, you know? Around mentally ill village, downtown Portland, Old Town. But he's so fucking good already. Like, I'm not saying, you know, he's going to become a star, but I'm saying he has incredible potential, and he's already proving how quickly he improves and how great he is at both ends when you give him enough time and opportunity to be able to capitalize on his ethic and his focus and drive. I would love to be able to build around him and keep him. In fact, actually, that's more reason why you could argue we would be able to do that and pull that off. Because again, think about it. Who the fuck is going to care unless he's just a random little minor salary filler? Because his contract is also really fucking affordable. It's like 4 years. Isn't it like 4 years, 18 million or something? Or it's somewhere between like 18, like 32 million, I think, over 4 years. Now, obviously, 1 year less on his contract, or maybe it was 3 years. Either way, it's a egregiously dirt cheap contract, but it's perfect for any team, especially if they recognize his abilities already and where he's going to be going if you give him that opportunity. Nas probably should go. I understand that he has a lot of potential. He's actually really fun to watch, and he is. Is he worth his contract, especially on a rebuilding team? Probably not. Do you think he has that much potential? Maybe, but I'd still probably trade Nas, because it's like, it was a 4-year, $50 million contract I think we signed him to, so you might as well trade him. He's perfect, because then you guaranteed you're going to get more assets for him, so considering it's already clear that other teams have clearly valued him a lot. Because there's what is it, Cleveland, I think, is the main one, who's like really determined to get him, and I guess for multiple seasons now, they've had super strong interest in him and acquiring him. Which actually, think about it, Young Hung Nas on freaking Cleveland would actually be wildly fun to watch, because he'd fit them perfectly. Not just their timeline, he'd fit their energy, he'd fit the way they play. Actually, that would be really fun to watch him play on Cleveland. Last night in the draft, it proved this team is non-committal. Dame's non-committal. The team's non-committal. And they're trying to go 3 different directions all at once. It's not sustainable.